I think when people say, is the social media's fault? I think the answer really depends on what one means by that. People often try to say, oh, are we in a worse world now than if social media had not existed? And that's very hard to answer. If it wasn't social media, I think a lot of these bad outcomes would be happening, perhaps due to other ways in which people interact with each other. But I think what is definitely true is that the companies running these platforms could be doing a better job of curbing some of these problems. And that's where content moderation comes in, right? It's the idea of having a policy for what can stay on the app and what can't, and enforcing that policy.
So you talk about social media in the book, a subject of interest to lots of people these days, given the plausible reason to believe it's done a certain amount of damage to our society and politics. Now for starters, you don't put a lot of hope in content moderation. Am I right about that?
I think content moderation is good for certain things.
Maybe we should identify the problem. What is it that you think is most pernicious as things stand about social media and their algorithms?
There are many things that people are concerned about when it comes to social media. Addiction, mental health, especially for teen girls, polarization, enabling violence in some cases. I think when people say, is the social media's fault? I think the answer really depends on what one means by that. People often try to say, oh, are we in a worse world now than if social media had not existed? And that's very hard to answer. If it wasn't social media, I think a lot of these bad outcomes would be happening, perhaps due to other ways in which people interact with each other. But I think what is definitely true is that the companies running these platforms could be doing a better job of curbing some of these problems. And that's where content moderation comes in, right? It's the idea of having a policy for what can stay on the app and what can't, and enforcing that policy. And the big challenge with content moderation is that you have to balance free expression and curbing a lot of these harms. And I think it's a genuine challenge. I think there's no clear line that everybody is going to agree on. And so that's one reason why AI is very tempting, right? So instead of bickering about these different groups of stakeholders wanting different things from the system, we'll just leave it to AI. It's going to be an objective judge of where the line should be. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just a completely faulty premise. I think that's not going to solve anything. I think social media companies already have a crisis of legitimacy because they're the arbiters of what can be said online, and they're unelected, unaccountable arbiters of the public square. It's not a position they asked for, right? When these app developers started building the first social networks, they did not imagine that they were going to be in this position. But now that they are in this position, the fact that they're making these decisions without very much oversight, I think everybody is unhappy with what's on these platforms. So some people are unhappy that free expression is being curbed too much, and other people are unhappy that there is too much harassment and vile content on these platforms. And so they're in a difficult position. And I think adding AI to the mix is only going to further weaken their legitimacy, because a lot of people don't trust AI, and ultimately the AI can only be as trustworthy as the actor that is wielding it. And so I don't think it's going to solve that problem at all.
Are you talking about AI used in content moderation? Because I mean, they are using AI in the algorithm itself, but that's what you're talking about?
That's right. So AI being used to decide which posts to take down and which ones to leave up.
One thing I think I learned, if I understood correctly from the book, is that these community notes that Twitter has experimented with, I gather they are given more prominence if they are being boosted or getting, thumbs ups from kind of both sides of some tribal divide or something of political, which tells me, for starters, that they do have ways of identifying generally antagonistic groups, it sounds like, right? Like they know, like this group and this group, well, either have a very low correlation of agreement on what is good content. Maybe that's the definition of what they're doing, right? Just low correlation of agreement. Or do they have a way of gauging active antagonism between the groups?
Yeah, I mean, from a computer science perspective, the beautiful thing about this is that it's the first thing. It's just based on the correlation matrix. The identity of these two groups kind of falls out. And it's generally believed that it aligns with our political axis, but no one has looked inside the AI, if you will, and really tried to identify if the two antagonistic groups that the model has identified is, the groups that we're familiar with. But there's a lot of evidence that it's roughly the same. And yes, I think this notion of bridging, which is what it's called, that community notes are visible when people from different sides of the divide can agree on it. I think that's wonderful. That's exactly the kind of thing that's necessary for the health of social media. And when I said earlier that companies aren't doing enough, this is exactly the kind of thing they should be doing more of. I'm a fan of community notes. I think it should be much more widely deployed. And it should be deployed not just at the level of notes that you attach to posts, but also at the level of the recommendation algorithm that surfaces these posts in people's feeds in the first place. So I think posts that have agreements from across different parts of the divide should get more visibility.
Okay, so it sounds like they are now doing that like with the community notes, but one can also imagine doing it more broadly within the algorithm, right? Just
That's right.
promoting content that the two generally antagonistic tribes both seem to like, and demoting, giving less momentum to content that is exclusively, more or less exclusively liked by one tribe or the other. They could do that, but they're not. And look, it sounds like the consequences of that would not be easy to predict and could be complicated, but it sounds like they're not even trying that.
I have not seen any, pilot of that kind of system even. And I think that's unfortunate. And I hope that at least some of the smaller networks will try it. And I can see why the larger ones are not. I think there are definitely going to be people unhappy with that. In some sense, by doing that, they would be expressing a political stance that more centrist content is better than ideologically aligned content. So that itself is a political stance that they might be unhappy with expressing. They might want to, kind of stay neutral on that. But I think the consequences of the way social media is now are such that I would much prefer for companies to bite that bullet, acknowledge that they're arbiters of content anyway, and be comfortable with expressing a stance and what they think is better for the public square and for humanity.
I mean, it might not always be centrist per se. In other words, there are things that like Trumpists and the fairly far left agree on. There's a populist element to both, maybe having to do with economic policy, maybe having to do with foreign policy. There's a very strong non-interventionist strand in both. But neither of those kinds of policies is generally thought of as in the middle of the political spectrum, right? I mean, that's what I mean when I say it's hard for me to imagine exactly what the consequences would be, but I don't think it would be quite as simple as, choosing a centrist position in every case.
Oh, definitely agree with that. It would be hard to predict, but whatever it is that ends up happening, in a sense, it's because the platform put its thumb on the scales, right? And that's what the companies are worried of. They don't want to be accused of doing that. So whatever content gets promoted as a result of this, some other content is going to get demoted, and the people who stand to lose from that are going to accuse the companies of taking a side here, and they don't want that. But I wish they would, they would be bolder.
Well, also, aren't they in a stronger position to defend what they're doing than they are when they do something they have done, which is that, say, people in the administration, the current presidential administration, contact them and say, we think this is misinformation. And they have very often paid attention to that guidance in the past, maybe not so much Elon Musk, at least not with this administration. But that's cases where human beings are looking at and are aware of its ideological location and saying, yeah, we're getting rid of it, they could at least say, look, here's the algorithm. Here's the way it works. It's all about correlation. And sometimes it works to the benefit of this, I almost think, there are cases where I think we'd be better off just saying, look, we turned it over to the AI. Don't blame us, right?
Well, I definitely agree that there are genuine concerns about what should be what is and is not a permissible level of interaction between governments and companies when it comes to content moderation. Um, I, I'm less optimistic than you that turning it over to the AI is going to solve any problem. I think it's great to have a standardized process and a published policy and to stick to that policy and for that policy to be transparent. But I'm not sure automation is really the answer.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking, like I'm old enough to remember a totally different information ecosystem, 3 networks, 3 TV networks, and so on. There was a certain amount of inherent centralization that, had a homogenizing effect on opinion and had a marginalizing effect on very small constituencies unless they had ways of being very powerful. And that has obvious downsides, but the country wasn't on the verge of civil war. That was kind of nice. So, I'm just saying, in principle, algorithms could simulate some features of a different, technological, media infrastructure.
Yep. That's a fair assessment.